2021 has been another very strange year. Back in 2018, me and my girlfriend Emma left the UK to travel the world full time. It was a plan that we had worked towards for years, and it was quite easily the best decision we've ever made. And looking back now, those times, those adventures feel like a very distant memory. Open roads, open borders, and a feeling of freedom that really doesn't exist anymore. At least, not in the same way. We packed our bags and returned to the UK in the summer of 2019. And just as we started rebuilding our lives here, the world completely locked down. We were all unable to leave the country or even our homes. It was a very strange time for just about everyone. But eventually, in April 2021, after a terrible winter and a cancelled Christmas, the lockdowns in the UK finally started to loosen. And all that anybody could talk about was staycations. Travelling abroad was still pretty complicated, so we found ourselves looking for some more local trips to at least try and reconnect with our homeland. And the UK is full of beautiful places to visit. In the spring, we flew up to the Scottish Highlands, where we drove for 8 days through some of the most surreal scenery and some very unpredictable weather. In the summer, we spent a few weeks in Manchester, one of my favourite cities, seeing friends, family, and it's just one of those places that always manages to surprise you. The things you see on a normal road in Manchester. It's a bloody tank. We even drove over to the Welsh coast for the first time, the land of unreadable place names. So you could say that we really travelled to the very extremes of our homeland during those few months. But despite all of those miles, I still struggle to find that same inspiration I get when I travel to a faraway place with a different climate, a different culture, which is why I didn't even try and make any new videos around that time. For lack of a better word, the UK is familiar. Too familiar. And it wasn't like we didn't try and go abroad either. We had a trip booked to go over to Ireland, we had a trip booked to Poland, but they were both cancelled not once, not twice, but 3 times in the end. So after experiencing that, we were just put off making other plans. It was just too unpredictable. There were too many risks. But eventually, a mixture of things feeling a little less uncertain and a bit of desperation on my part led me to start planning some travel abroad once again. And as the autumn leaves started to fall, I started making some secret bookings to finally get us beyond the borders of the UK. So, in 8 days' time, it's Emma's birthday. And me and Emma, we have a bit of a tradition when it comes to each other's birthdays. We never normally buy each other a physical gift. We normally organise some sort of surprise experience or trip for each other. And over the years, they have tended to get pretty extravagant. It all started when I organised a scavenger hunt across London, which ended in us seeing a West End show. So the next year, Emma organised me a surprise trip up to Edinburgh, and that was the first time I'd ever been to Scotland, and that was a really nice long weekend. The year after, I thought, right, I really need to up my game here, so I took her to Paris, and that was another really amazing trip. And then it just kept getting bigger and bigger. The next year, she took me to Prague, and then when we were travelling around Southeast Asia, we were in the Philippines, and she somehow managed to organise a completely separate trip without me knowing. We ended up flying to Siem Reap in Cambodia, and I got to spend my birthday exploring the amazing temples of Angkor Wat, which has been on my bucket list for as long as I can remember. So, yeah, it gets pretty big. But obviously, over the last couple of years, through all the lockdowns and all the COVID stuff, we haven't been able to do anything particularly exciting. It's all been a little bit smaller, a little bit more local. So now that the restrictions have loosened, I think it's time to go big, and I want to plan something pretty special. You see, Emma is obviously very well travelled, much more well travelled than I am, but there is definitely one place where she has never been. So I'm getting her up very, very early on her birthday morning, which she won't like, but I'm hoping it'll be worth it. And I'm going to try and keep it a secret for as long as possible, so as of right now, she doesn't even know that we're going abroad for the first time in 2 years. But as you can see from Emma's Instagram stories that morning, things didn't get much clearer on the journey into London. But then, we arrived here. And you know, after all of the craziness that's been going on the last 2 years, I think it's just time that we just had some fun. And I can't think of many better places to do that than where we're going. So do you know where you're going? So, if you hadn't already guessed, we're going to Disneyland. And stepping through those gates really does feel like you're entering a different world. I hadn't been to a Disney park in over 10 years, but the theming, the sounds, the smells, it makes you feel like a kid again. And you just need to embrace that. That trip was just fun. It was very quick, only 2 nights, and Disneyland in itself doesn't really feel like travelling abroad, but it was still the perfect escape. It was a new experience for us to share together, and at the end of the day, isn't that what travel's all about? Cheers, happy birthday. And really, this was just supposed to be a quick taste of getting back on the road, back into the swing of travelling, because the next week, we had already planned a trip to Prague, the real-life fairy tale city in the Czech Republic. But travel in these times isn't as easy or simple as it used to be. The UK re-entry requirements meant that we still had to take a pricey PCR test on our arrival back home. That is awful. And that's when things took an unfortunate turn. Well, this is annoying. To be honest, I'd already resigned myself to the fact that this would probably happen at some point, especially now that we're out travelling again, but after the first trip, come on. Tracing my steps back a little bit, I think it's probably most likely that I caught it when I was in London a few days before we went to France, but I guess there's no real way of telling. It's something that you can catch anywhere. And now, by UK government rules, I have to self-isolate for 10 days, which normally isn't a problem because I do all of my work from home, but it just so happens that next week we had an amazing trip to Prague planned, which was going to be so much fun. It was going to be a great video, but now, obviously, it's not going to happen. But I suppose we have to look at the positives. As of right now, I feel absolutely fine. I've taken a lateral flow test at home and that's come up negative, but obviously the PCR test is a lot more accurate and it's very unlikely that there'll be a false positive result from one of those. So it is what it is. 10 days of self-isolation, and hopefully I carry on feeling absolutely fine like I do now. I actually kept a full video diary of those 10 days, but honestly, watching it back, it was pretty boring. I never developed any symptoms, so I just carried on my work at home as normal, and yeah, that was about it. And the only strange part of that whole time was that Emma took a second PCR test, which surprisingly came back negative. despite her being around me for the entire 10 days. Sick of it. Freedom. Feels so good to be back outside with the change of scenery. And I love this time of year, when the leaves turn this golden brown colour. It's gorgeous. To be honest, most of my day-to-day life looked pretty much the same as it always does. I work from home, so I spend a lot of time just sitting at my desk, working on my laptop, but it makes a massive difference when you're not allowed to go outside, when you can't choose to go on that walk whenever you want to, when you can't go out and meet friends. So it definitely feels good to get back to normal. And mostly I just feel quite relieved and thankful that I never developed any real symptoms. So hopefully that means that the old double jab has done its job. And finally, we boarded that flight to Prague. Our first international flight in over 2 years. We managed to move all of the bookings and it was just another really great trip. It's such a beautiful city and a place that we've both been to before, so there was less sightseeing and more eating, drinking, and, well, plenty more of both. And moving our dates meant that we just so happened to arrive at the right time to see all of the decorations going up for Christmas. But then, back in London, a familiar news cycle started to rear its ugly head. A new variant threatened to cancel Christmas once again, and rumours of incoming lockdowns made it very hard to see what was on the horizon, potentially throwing any future travel plans up in the air once again. And speaking of travel plans, there is one part of this story that I haven't told you about yet. Ever since we got back to the UK over 2 years ago now, there's been some plans brewing in the back of our minds. And in recent months, those plans have become very, very real. In just a matter of weeks now, which is quite scary, we are getting on a flight, a long-haul flight, to finally leave the UK and go back to a very special place. So, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and I might see you very soon in some very familiar surroundings.